Hello and welcome to my sewing workshop as part of Bolton Museum's Sharing Art event, a day celebrating art and creativity in Bolton, curated by the museum's young producers and has been funded by Curious Minds as part of its Hope Streets programme. I am Nerissa Cargill Thompson, a local artist who creates coastal-inspired contemporary textiles and mixed media sculptures using recycled materials, particularly old clothes, hence the very messy workshop. Through this workshop, you will learn some simple textile techniques to turn an old shirt into a unique cushion cover, and how to add a pop of contrast using an old t-shirt or some other fabric scraps. So, I'll teach you running stitch and how to make the ridged effect. I'll teach you whip stitch to add on the applique, and how to make a suffolk puff, which I also added using the whip stitch. I recommend watching the video all the way through, then going and get your materials ready, and then watching the workshop step by step, pausing when you need to. To make your cushion cover, you will need an old button-up shirt. You might have one lying around, or you can pick them up cheaply at the charity shop. You'll need a measuring tape or ruler, some scissors, some pins, needle and cotton, some lids or small bowls, basically something round to draw circles with, a pencil or biro to do that, and some newspaper or scrap paper for making your own pattern pieces. You can make a lovely cover using the texture techniques and just the shirt, but if you've got an old shirt or maybe some other scraps like an old scarf, this will allow you to expand your design and add a bit of colour or pattern or texture. You can also make a feature of your stitching using wool or embroidery thread. If you do this, you might need some needles with slightly bigger eyes. And of course, you will need a cushion pad. Mine is 40 by 40, which is quite standard. So now we're going to make our back panel first out of the front of the shirt, because this gives us the ready-made button opening, no need for fiddly zips. I'm going to measure down the buttons as they're good for a guide, and we also want to make sure that we don't hit one of the buttons when we're sewing, so we want to make sure that we cut and sew between the buttons. Your panel needs to be 1 centimetre bigger on each side than your cushion pad, so mine was 40 by 40, so my cushion pad is 42 by 42. So once you've measured that, draw a line at that height all the way across both top and bottom and cut them. So once you've cut top and bottom, you're left with a bit of a tube, and it's time to put in the verticals. I've placed this one in, giving me plenty of room for seams around the pocket. Then measured my 42 across top and bottom. I've then cut down those lines, but this time only cut through one layer, giving us our 42 by 42 back panel, but leaving us plenty of fabric for our front panel so we can do our decorative ridges. Now to do the ridged effect. My shirt was quite wide, so I've got plenty of fabric. Make sure that you don't do too many ridges so that it's no longer as wide as your back piece. So I'm going to do an extra one here. So we fold it over. That using the striped material means you can see it more easily, but is less forgiving if you go wrong. So You pin it, and then we stitch it. So, running stitch is one of the basic stitches we're going to be using today. That you just go in, out, making a dashing line, but rather than doing each stitch at a time, I like to feed mine onto my needle. Once I've got a few on, I just pull through, and there we have our dotted line. I'll show you that again. In, out, feeding it onto the needle, then pull, oops, got caught on the pin, pull through. Okay. Another simple way to get some pattern and texture into your design is, if you have a patterned shirt, like I've got this stripe, is to cut pieces and place them in a new direction. So here I've taken the stripes from this way and put them this way. Got a row of 3 squares, and next I'm going to show you a stitch called whip stitch to stitch them on. So once again I'm using a thin wool so that the stitches show up better on camera. So I've done a knot behind and pulled it through, and you just go in directly where your stitches come out, and then diagonally and come out a bit further along and pull it. So in, opposite where you were there, go diagonal and come out. And that eventually you go all the way around, you'll have a little dash and your patch will be securely on. Like the squares, circles can also be used to make an interesting pattern, but I'm going to show you how to use a raised pattern using a technique called suffolk puffs. To make your suffolk puffs, you will need some circles of your fabric. I have got a couple of different size lids to make mine in different sizes. The resulting puffs will end up half the size of your lid. So place your lids down and draw around them, and then cut them out. Now to turn our circles into suffolk puffs. So I've got a needle and thread doubled over and knotted at the end, and now back to that simple running stitch that we learnt earlier. In, out, about half a centimetre from the edge, until you've gone all the way around. Be quite big stitches, not enormous, about a centimetre, as we're going to gather. So now we've got a little pouch, and we flatten it out into a rosette and do a couple of stitches and knots just to secure it. Okay. Then we have suffolk puff. Simple. Now I have a series of different sized suffolk puffs ready to be attached to my cushion. You can use them textured side up or flat. I prefer textured. They look like little rosettes or flowers, or to me they remind me of the limpets from my own work. And because of that, I'm going to add a colour pop like in my own work, using more scraps of old clothes. So I've chosen an old yellow t-shirt and a mossy green moth-eaten scarf for my colour pops to give some colour and texture. To decide what shape I'm going to use, I've made some patterns using newspaper. So place your pattern piece on the t-shirt, draw around it and cut it out. Once you've cut them out, place them where you want them on your cushion and pin them in position, and then stitch around them using whip stitch like we did on the squares. Once you've stitched around your colour blobs, it's time to position your suffolk puffs. I've grouped mine in 2 groups of 3, like the limpets on my artwork. Pin them into position, so they're nice and flat, and then whip stitch round the edges like we did before. So now you've got all your suffolk puffs stitched on, your front is ready. So give it a little press before getting your back piece and put it pattern side to button side. Lie them on top, pin on all sides and stitch on all sides, either with a running stitch or with a sewing machine. So I've now pinned on all 4 sides and it's time to stitch. So if you've got a sewing machine, just stitch it with a running stitch, a centimetre in, all the way around. If you don't have a sewing machine, stitch it with a running stitch all the way around, but then go around a second time, filling in the gaps so that you've got a more secure finish. So once you've stitched all the way round, trim off any excess. Once you've done that, trim across your corners diagonally, but not cutting into your stitching, as this will give you sharp corners when you turn it the right way out. Because we've got the button opening, we can now turn it the right way out and make sure our corners are nice and pointy. So there we have our full cushion with the button opening, ready to add our cushion pad. So now you have a finished, unique cushion out of recycled clothes with handy button back. You have learnt running stitch to create the pleating. You've learnt whip stitch to add on the applique. You've learnt how to make a suffolk puff. I hope you're proud of yourselves, and if you're sharing them on social media, please tag me. I'm at Nerissa CT because I would love to see your creations. Do check out more of my work on Instagram or on my website. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to Bolton Museum and Curious Minds for funding this workshop. Goodbye.